Hi, friends, and welcome to Good Enough 444. My name's Emily, and this is a space where we talk about healing, growth, and the messy, beautiful process of learning to believe and know that we are already enough, just as we are. I share my own story of growing up in a polygamous cult, navigating family, faith, and freedom. And I connect it to the stories we see played out on TLC's Sister Wives. These conversations aren't just about a TV show. They're about real people, real struggles, and the power of doing our personal healing work. So whether you are here because you were curious or because you've walked a similar path, or because you are looking for a reminder that you are not alone, you are in the right place. Let's dive in. All right, guys, it has been a week. Goodness, yeah, it has been a really hard week. September is usually a really fun, exciting month, or it used to be a really fun, exciting month. We used to do our big family reunion at the beginning of September, the end of August, beginning of September. 26 years ago, yesterday, 3 months after my 17th birthday, I got married. So, for those of you that don't know, my father is the prophet of the AUB, which stands for Apostolic United Brethren, and it is the largest polygamous cult around the world. So, they have about 10,000 members, and those members span from Montana down to Mexico. And I think they even have members out in like Illinois. I'm not sure if they have members in Canada. I think they do, but I'm not really sure. So back to it. 26 years ago, it blows my mind to say that number. Yeah, 17 is barely starting my senior year of high school. And I started out doing packets, which quickly I learned I did not have time for. So 17 years old, getting married, just a baby. This is one of my wedding photos, my bridal photos. And I look at that and think, wow, I was a baby and I did not have a clue what I was in for. I didn't have a clue what married life was really all about. And I thought that things were going to be so much different than they really were. Anyways, it has really been kind of a tricky week. As I've said in some of my other videos, I got divorced at the very end of 2023. Actually, the divorce started around July of 23, and then it was finalized by the end of November. It was really, really quick. And looking back, there's a lot of things that I would have done different. There's definitely things that I'm extremely grateful for, and there are things that I think are so incredibly hard, and I don't think that they need to be, and there's not necessarily a lot that I can do about it. So I do my best to take things kind of one day at a time right now and just roll with the punches. So I woke up Tuesday morning with a really bad kidney infection. And actually, it was Wednesday morning. I woke up Wednesday morning in a ton of back pain and a migraine like I had not experienced in a long time. So I originally thought, oh my God, this is one of the worst migraines that I've ever had. And then on Thursday, I realized, oh no, this is a really severe kidney infection and I better do what it takes to get rid of this. So I did what I could to get rid of the kidney infection. And then on Monday evening, my little dog, Miko, my tiny little Shih Tzu, started coughing. And that is a terrible sound if you've ever had a dog that gets sick and starts coughing. So I'm pretty sure she has a case of kennel cough. I don't really take her around other dogs, but my girls did walk her to the park about a week prior to her getting sick. So I think she may have picked something up at the park, and she's doing a little bit better today. She's still coughing a little bit here and there, but it's not nearly as bad as it was. And then I think my little niece, who has been coming and going, has COVID. So I woke up a couple days ago with kind of a sinus infection, had cold feeling. So bear with me on this video. Hopefully that doesn't totally make my voice and my head crazy. All right, so let's get into it. I finally got my office slash living room space back, and now I'm not having to use that other funky screen. So in this video, I am going to talk about chapter 8 of Christine's book. I know that a lot of people are kind of, jamming through this, like I've said prior. I am taking it a little bit slower. I'm new to YouTube and content creation, and I'm having fun with it. I've done a lot of YouTube videos. My first one was back in 2022, May of 22. So about 6 months after my dad became the prophet of the AUB. And I was absolutely blown away when that happened. I had always been a daddy's girl. And then my mom worked with my dad at his office doing his secretarial stuff, running the front desk, paying the bills, doing the taxes, that kind of stuff. Really just, helping my dad out where she could down there. And then she had a stroke in 2016, and my baby was about 9 months old, but my mom had been living with me at the time. Her and my little sister and my little brother Robert, that has had Down syndrome, were living in my basement for a couple of months in a transition. My dad had all of his wives were living in separate homes, and they ended up selling each one of those homes and purchasing a property about 2 hours south of the Salt Lake Valley. And that property has 4 homes on it. So they're kind of like duplex style homes, but they don't share walls. So there's a house, a double carport, and a house, and then it turns kind of in an L shape, and there's a house, double carport, and a house. And so the people that they bought it from were renting out all 4 of the homes, and my mom's was the last one for the renters to leave. So it was about a 3-month layover, and during that time she had a stroke. It was about 2:30 in the morning, and I woke up to my ex-husband kind of shaking me and telling me, "Hey, baby, you got to wake up. Something's going on with your mom." So I flew out of bed. Like I said, my baby was about 9 months old. I never got postpartum depression. I had always had anxiety my whole life. And this particular night, I had gone to bed pretty anxious. And so being woken up like that definitely did not help that anxiety, but I think regardless, I would have been anxious about that situation. So I went downstairs to talk to my mom. She was laying on the bed, and she said, "I really need to get up and go to the bathroom. Can you guys help me get up and go to the bathroom?" She didn't have any use of her left leg and barely any use of her left arm. So she said, "Sweetheart, can you see my face? How does my face look? Is it drooping on one side?" And I was like, "No, Mom, it's not. What's going on? What's happening? What are you feeling?" And she just couldn't move that left side of her body. So I told her, "I think it's time. We need to call 911. This is definitely a critical emergency." So we called 911. The paramedics came. I had a walkout basement, and they were able to go down the side of my house, come in through my walkout basement right to the room that she was staying in. And I don't know how they do it, they're magic, but they got her up into a wheelchair, and they were able to strap her into that wheelchair and bring her up and around the side of my house. So needless to say, it was very stressful. It was a very, very scary. My baby sister was 16 at the time, and my baby brother, Robert, was 22. So Robert was 22 going on, he reached the mentality of about, I don't know, a 4 or 5-year-old. And he was a blast. We had a ton of fun with him. And yet he also required a lot of care because he was special needs. And so that never bothered me. I loved having him in my home. I loved that boy so much. We just had such a great relationship. I was 12 years old when he was born, and my friend at the time nicknamed him Doodlebug. And so we called him Doodlebug, and anybody that has a Down syndrome friend or family member knows how floppy they are, and they can twist into pretzels and bend all over the place. And I started working for my dad at that time, and originally I was still taking my mom in there, and then I was helping her do whatever, she couldn't do. And so I started to learn what she was doing because it became very apparent she wasn't going to be able to go back to working in there full time like she was. She wasn't going to be able to handle those things consistently. I worked with my dad from 2016 until my baby got sick at the beginning of 2019 and then was diagnosed with a really rare autoimmune disease called juvenile dermatomyositis. So that diagnosis came in October of 2019. In September of 2019, my then 17-year-old daughter got dropped during a stunt for her drill team at the high school, and she started having really severe migraines. So having migraines, and Hope gets diagnosed with juvenile dermatomyositis, really pushing through. It's her senior year of high school. She's been on the drill team now for 3 years. She's starting out her 4th year, and I'm working at my dad's business. We get to a dance competition at the beginning of December, and my ex-husband was getting ready to go back to a corporate job because we needed to have health insurance. At that time, we had been doing cash pay for all of our medical care. And then my baby Hope gets diagnosed with this really rare, really scary autoimmune disease. And suddenly we looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical care. Well, at one of these dance competitions at the beginning of December, my ex-husband starts to fever. He's having severe abdominal pain, and one of our good friends whose daughter was also on the drill team happened to be an RN. So thank God she's there that day because she talks him into going to the emergency room. And we're about 45 minutes north of where we live. So we make the decision to leave the dance competition, drive the 45 minutes down, and go to a local hospital just in case he has appendicitis and he needs to have surgery. We don't want to be stuck at a hospital up north. So anyways, he goes in there, they run a bunch of blood work, they do a CT scan, and they can't find anything wrong with his stomach. They don't see anything wrong with his appendix. The blood work comes back great. They can't figure out why this man is in pain, but they discover that he has a lesion on his kidney and he's also got a lesion on his liver. So at the beginning of December of 2019, just 2 months after our baby has been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disease that only 2 in a million kids are diagnosed with in a year in the United States, he gets diagnosed with kidney cancer. And shortly after he gets diagnosed with kidney cancer, our 14-year-old daughter starts to get sick, and we can't figure out what's wrong with her. So our baby's sick with a really severe autoimmune disease. The ex-husband's got kidney cancer. It has something to do with consistent migraines, daily migraines every day for 2 years. We did everything under the sun we could possibly do. And finally, on a Saturday night at 8:30 p.m., our physical therapist calls me and says, Emily, I just got back from a conference in Texas, and they're talking about the whole conference was on this autonomic disorder called POTS. Well, POTS stands for postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. She says, I really think that this is what it has. So what do we do? She tells me some of the things that we can do to try and see, if that's what it has, but we need to get our doctor to give her a referral to a doctor up at the University of Utah named Melissa Cortez. Melissa Cortez is the only one in the Western United States that can diagnose this type of autonomic disorder. So thank God is still a minor at this point, because when you're an adult and you need critical care, it is so hard. You go on waiting lists. You don't get in right away. When it's a child, they will get you in there as fast as they can. So we got her in. She was officially diagnosed with POTS. Now we've got who is 15. She's got completely different symptoms from, we're testing her for everything. We're trying to figure out what she's got. We are applying for Medicaid. We're going in weekly for appointments for, and in the process of that, the pediatrician really flippantly says, oh, I'll bet she has POTS like us. Wow, okay. These kids have completely different symptoms from each other, but we'll get her into Melissa, send up the referral. So we get her up there, they test her, and it is a battery of tests. It takes a lot of strength and mental stability to go through all of these tests. So they get her tested. Sure enough, she's diagnosed with POTS. It's a different form of POTS, but it is POTS nonetheless. And so her and I both have it. It presents in their bodies differently, and it's treated differently because of the way that it affects them. So we literally are starting out 2020 with 4 major medical conditions. We get my ex-husband scheduled to have his kidney cancer removed. We go in for that on, I think it was on March. And of course, we know, a little bit about COVID and what that entails. We are just winging it, doing the best that we can to deal with these medical conditions. So he goes in for major surgery. We have no idea. Are they going to remove his kidney? Are they going to remove half of his kidney? What's this going to look like? We didn't know for sure going into that, but they do his surgery. It turns out that the tumor that he had, like a golf ball sized tumor, and it's just sitting on top of his kidney. So they were only needing to remove 2% of his kidney. They just took out the top, just like cut out the very top of his kidney underneath that tumor in order to, make sure that they removed all of the cancer. So thankfully they got everything. He's been going back every 6 months for the last 5 years and getting a battery of blood tests done, T scans, everything to make sure that that doesn't come back. And in that process, we have developed a team of doctors for the baby, and now we've got it to where after doing a provider switch at the end of 2022, we've got Hope pretty stable, and she's doing pretty good on the meds that she does. So we met with her pediatrician yesterday. Her pediatrician said we had seen her back in May, and in May she said, my God, Emily, I've never met this version of, this is amazing to me. She looks awesome. And then yesterday she said that same thing. Wow, who is this kid? I've never met this version of, she's amazing. Remind me what meds, the room switched around to get her to this point. So the only reason she was asking that is because that specific medical establishment had just switched their portal, their records portal. And so we basically had to run through all of her records again and kind of go over and confirm everything. Obviously, she knows what her diagnosis is. What's crazy about this pediatrician is she was my nephew's pediatrician, and my nephew had some really rare things. And when he got sick, my sister said, what she has going on seems to be something really rare. And this pediatrician specializes in, rare different things with kids. So get her into this pediatrician if you can. Thankfully, we were able to. She kind of bumped in a little bit quicker because my nephew was already an established patient. And so after seeing 6 other doctors, 3 pediatricians specifically, none of them could figure out what Hope had. And this doctor came in, took a look at her and said, oh, she's got juvenile dermatomyositis. We need to get her into a rheumatologist. They're going to put her on steroids and they're going to give her some NSAIDs and she's gonna do great. So I leave with her. I get a phone call about an hour later. Sure enough, it's a rheumatologist up at Primary Children's Hospital. And I take her up there the very next day. They see her. She starts telling me what JDM entails. And I am sitting there I should not be in this appointment by myself. This is way more than what I expected it to be. It was a lot. I grew up in a cult. We did everything as natural as we possibly could. We didn't really take Tylenol or ibuprofen. And now you're telling me that she has to get chemo shots once a week and she's got to have, big giant IV bags full of steroids pumped into her body once a week. And then she's got to take steroids in the morning and she's got to take steroids at night. And yeah, it was a lot. It really definitely changed my outlook on the real world, right? Growing up in a cult, we're so insulated in our community. We don't really know or understand what the real world is, and we're scared of everything. So I'm going to kind of talk about that in Christine's book. Now, I know I just went squirrel on you guys. I said we were going to start this, and then I dove into 20 minutes about medical stuff about my life, but welcome to good enough. When I think that I can't get any crazier, I do. All right, guys. Chapter 8, my most magical moments. This is the longest chapter and it is full of a lot of information. It starts out saying, when we got married, we moved around a lot. It seemed like every few years, Cody would need to look for something new, and he wanted to better support the family. First year, Janelle had Logan and I had Aspen. That resonates a lot with me. So she talks about moving from the trailer in Wyoming because it couldn't accommodate all of them. So about a year later, they moved to West Jordan, Utah. And then a year after that, they moved to nearby Sandy. And then a year later, they moved to another house in Sandy. In the meantime, Mary had Leon, Janelle had Madison, and Christine had McKelty. Then Janelle had Hunter and then Garrison. So they had 4 adults and 7 kids to care for and feed. She said it seemed like someone was pregnant at all times. Goodness, I can imagine. I remember having my mom and a sister wife or 2 pregnant at the same time. So this is around the time that she had McKelty. And I love how she describes this. She said she felt decisive and beautiful, the most beautiful I've ever been in my life. So she talks next about when it was time, they called the midwife, he was a man who usually worked with his first wife. He had 2 wives and they actually both had the same name. So that first wife couldn't make it. So he brought another wife that Christine had never worked with. But she did know who she was through the church. Actually, I was listening to Melanie and Corey earlier today, and they were saying that she was one of the ones who taught in Sunday school and taught all of the doom and gloom. I actually had her and her husband deliver my first biological child, and I absolutely loved them. They did a phenomenal job. He was so incredibly kind and compassionate, and he knew everything. When they delivered my first, I was in a group of 5 girls who were due within 2 weeks of each other. All 5 of us had our babies within 2 days of each other. I was 5th one. I was the last one to have my baby, so they had been delivering babies for 2 straight days on barely any sleep when I had my daughter. So she asked her if she knew what she was doing when she arrived, and she said, "Yeah, I've been delivering babies for far longer than my sister wife." She talks about how Cody was fantastic again. He got right in her face, stared at her the whole time, took every breath with her, and was completely present. She said it was her fastest labor, which describes McKelty to a T. If she's going to do something, she just does it. That's all there is to it. She talks about how Mary and Janelle were in their own bedrooms and slept through it. So she said her labor lasted 4 hours. God, that's amazing. My shortest labor was 6. I had 2 6-hour labors and 2 9-hour labors. She said then her and Cody both fell asleep, so no one in the house even knew she had given birth. She said that McKelty was the prettiest newborn, but they constantly needed more space, and each move involved babies and pregnancies and 3 households, along with an abundance of food. In addition to canning and freezing, she said they bought everything in bulk because there were so many of us, but Mormons are preppers. Mormons were preppers before preppers was a thing. She said that the moves caused a lot of chaos. They had to come to rely on each other for childcare, cooking, and financial stability. So they're all relying on each other for financial stability to even be able to maintain regular life. She said that she believed they were building a deeper relationship that would continue to grow. And then she said about 4 years into the marriage, her and Cody had a moment that made her believe that she could be with him for eternity. So Cody sold educational DVDs, like church DVDs on the Book of Mormon and the Bible. It was all religious history stuff. And so the LDS has a historical site in Nauvoo, and they went there to, Cody had won a trip, or he needed to go there for 2 weeks to sell these DVDs. And she says he chose me to go with him. That I just think that hurts. Like, he chose me. These women are just essentially sitting around waiting for this man to give them any attention, to show them that they matter in any way, shape, or form. So I've watched this my whole life with all of my dad's wives. They are constantly doing whatever they can to gain favor with my dad. And reading this book and watching Sister Wives on TV, that's exactly what Mary and Janelle and Christine are doing with Cody. So in 1830, Joseph Smith was the original prophet. He founded the LDS Church in New York State. He and his followers had to flee several times because people didn't take kindly to his new religion. I think people didn't take kindly to him stealing their wives or their daughters. After fleeing to Missouri, the Mormons landed in Illinois, where the church bought land and called their new city Nauvoo. People didn't much like the Mormons in Nauvoo either. Interesting. A mob killed Smith and his brothers. Mormons go back to see the Joseph Smith homestead, the Smith family cemetery, the site where Smith and his brother were killed, the original temple site, and the Joseph Smith mansion house where temple ceremonies were performed. I think that's where Joseph took multiple wives before he had the revelation. I think it was like 1832. It was the 1832 revelation about polygamy, announcing polygamy. So apparently Aspen was 3 and McKelty was 2. And Christine had to come up with really creative ways to keep McKelty busy. So the thing that got her to think that she could spend eternity with Cody was that on their last day in Nauvoo, he introduced her to a coworker as his wife. So she asked him, has he met Mary? And he says, no, he hasn't. But back in their hometown, Mary was the one that went to all of the work parties, but none of the Nauvoo coworkers had met Mary, so he could actually call Christine his wife there. So she says, Cody later told me he looked at me as we drove home from that trip and realized he was in love with me. So this is 4 years into their relationship, 4 years, and he's just now telling her that he loves her, that he's in love with her. It breaks my heart. So literally, in my opinion, these men just breadcrumb these women all along the way. They just give them these little bits here and there, and it's enough. They give them just enough that these women hang on for even longer. So she says she remembers telling her brother that she thought Titanic, the movie, was dumb because that's not how love happens. I told him there's no such thing as instant love or love at first sight. No one falls in love like that. Romantic, huh? So this is her definition of how love works, and she's the one that believes in all of the fairy tales. So she says, I'm sure the little girl with the yellow towel would have rebelled against the notion that true, deep soulmate love didn't exist. How could I have my fairy tale without it? But I believed Cody and I had something rich and emotional because we had been friends first and then had worked to develop our love. So that was her experience, her only experience with love. So she used to tell her kids to build a strong friendship and that love would come later over time. And in the meantime, Cody talked to the kids about contracts. Marriage is a contract. Love is a business agreement you enter rather than a romantic, loving partnership. So she talks about how fairy tales were for monogamous, but they had a special relationship with God. And her and Cody had great dates. They went on trips together and they sang together in the car. They loved the Phantom of the Opera. And of course, Christine sang the Christine parts, and Cody had a good voice. She says they even got into a rhythm with sex, and there were a few years where it was kind of good. 4 years in, he tells her he loves her. They're just getting into a rhythm with their intimacy, and it was kind of good. About 2 years into their marriage, she has her first orgasm. 2 years in, she has her first orgasm, and she thinks, oh, that's what everyone's been so excited about. She said it was entirely accidental, but still, knowing Cody loved her helped her feel like she had a solid role in the family. As crazy as it sounds, considering how difficult it had been for the 4 years of us to get along, as well as our limited financial situation, we were all open to the idea of Cody bringing in a fourth wife in those early years. So those girls were all close in age, and suddenly they have, they're all young. They're starting out together, which honestly, I think if you're going to live that way, that's a great idea. Start with a few of them in the same age range. I still don't think that it's an appropriate way to live. I think it goes against everything that your body is created to be and do, and the mental gymnastics that you have to do in order to live this way, they're absurd. So she said that there was a young woman who was maybe 19 from their church that had expressed her interest in Cody, and that she had gone about it the proper way. And then Cody went and asked the church, who was her grandpa, and he asked if he could court the girl respectfully, just as he had done before dating Mary, Janelle, and Christine. She says, I can picture my grandpa nodding as he listened, then taking a slow breath. You know, Cody, my grandpa said, I don't think you're taking care of the wives you have. Jesus, that cat just scared the shit out of me. Whoa. My mom had told my grandpa that we didn't have any money. I asked her how she could say such a thing. Well, because it's true, she said. Fair. But it definitely caused problems between the Cody Brown family and her mom. So she said life continued as before with little breaks. In 98, she gave birth to Peyton while they lived in Sandy. Sandy is my absolute favorite place to live in the valley. Total squirrel side note. I lived there for 10 years, sold that house to move to this house because we needed more space. And then all my big kids moved out. I got divorced, and now the house feels huge. So someday I'll move back to Sandy and I can't wait. At that time, she worked at a car dealership and her personality completely changed. She was easygoing. She could talk to anyone. She says that's exactly how Peyton is. She said it was her hardest labor. He kept yo-yoing up and down, and that's still what he does. He vacillates and has a rough time making decisions, like whether he should come into the world. Cody and the midwife had to press on her belly to help push Peyton out. But immediately after he was born, Janelle came in and held him, and he opened his eyes and looked right at her. They have had the closest bond since the first moment, and it was such a cool thing to witness, especially since her sons became his brothers. At our house, he only had sisters, and it really is this way. I know that you'll hear Melanie and I talk about another wife's kids or siblings from another mother. We're all siblings and we were all raised together. And I love my siblings from the other mothers just as much as I love my siblings from my mom. So sometimes I think we might have closer relationships only because we grew up in the same house, and sometimes we have really close relationships with a sibling from, another mom, and that's okay. She said then from Sandy, they moved back to Wyoming in 98. That's the year I met my ex-husband. And that's where she had her most magical moments with Cody Brown family. They lived in a 3-bedroom ranch style house, which meant the kids who were toddlers lived in the bedrooms with their mothers. I think they had 7 kids now at this time, and then the 4 adults. And Cody just on a schedule rotated from room to room. So she said they would wait until the kids were asleep and then try to keep quiet. She said the house was small. I'm going to read this part word for word from her. The house was small. Janelle and I each had a bedroom off the living room by the only bathroom. Mary's bedroom was on the other side of the living room, and while she had one child, hers was the biggest bedroom. Neither Janelle nor I wanted the other to have to share a wall with Mary because she could be difficult. So we volunteered to take the small bedrooms. That meant I shared a wall with Janelle, which was ridiculously awkward because we also shared a husband. But everything was hard, including to have to share a tiny kitchen while trying to feed an enormous family. I mean, this book just fascinates me. It is so similar to the life that I grew up in, and Christine reminds me so much of my mom. Her story is so similar to my mom's story. And my dad always had a favorite wife. It's never been my mom. My mom has always been like a ticket wife. They need so many wives to get on the celestial kingdom. They need so many wives to be able to become a god. They need so many wives to be on the council. And then they need so many wives to be able to be the prophet of the church. And so you have some wives that you're absolutely in love with, you have a great relationship with. And then you have some wives that are ticket wives that, these wives are going to help you establish your place in the hierarchy of the church. Hi, baby. I love kisses. One more. Thank you. I have the cutest, sweetest little kitty. This is Miss Ma'am. Hi, Miss Ma'am. You're beautiful. She loves to give me kisses. She's so sweet. So she is the naughtiest, sassiest cat. She will tell you when she's mad. She will walk through this house and she will push shit off of every counter she possibly can. I have to go through my kitchen every night and make sure once the kids are in bed that there aren't any glass cups on the counter that are accessible for her. I can't tell you how many 2:30 a.m. glass cups shattering on my kitchen floor has happened. And as mad as I get when she does it, I still just giggle. I think it's so funny that she has that much personality and she knows that it's naughty and she is going to tell you that she's mad. So my girls and I have 4 cats, and then we have Miko, our little Shih Tzu. So I have 5 female animals, and then I have 5 daughters, and it's awesome. We have a blast. So now that I can make decisions without having to get permission about anything, we just do our thing and we love it. So they move back to Wyoming. That's where she has her most magical moments. They're each in their own rooms with their kids. Her and Janelle take the 2 tiny rooms. She says that it was ridiculously awkward because they shared a husband, but they're trying to feed an enormous family. And they had to share a tiny kitchen. In the tiny space, Mary's rules grew even stricter. I don't care how towels are folded. They go in the drawer and they're folded. In fact, I don't care if they get folded at all, as long as they end up in a drawer. I so can relate to that. Living with someone who has just the most absurd rules, like you can't use the ice maker to crush ice in the fridge because the crush ice function is going to make the ice maker burn out faster. So the kids are only allowed to get water and regular ice cubes out of the fridge because we need to prolong the life of the ice maker. So she doesn't care how they're folded. We went through towels so quickly, we barely had time to fold them. I don't care if kids play in the Tupperware cupboard or make a mess. I don't care if they eat all the food on their plate or take 3 bites. So hear you, sister. Like, get all the Tupperware out. Build a fort. The big jumbo bags of Solo cups from Costco. Does everyone know what those are for? They're for big giant towers. Even if it's a brand new bag, who cares? The couch cushions, the extra blankets, the sheets. Build all the forts. These kids are kids once. You get 18 summers with your kids if you're lucky, and they learn by play, right? They learn more while they're playing than they do being told rules and having to follow rules. My family thinks that I'm so crazy because I love Play-Doh. I love Play-Doh. I love slime. Okay, I don't love slime as much as I love Play-Doh, but if you put a Play-Doh kit on the kitchen table, and the majority of my adult life, I've had a glass kitchen table, and that's so that nails can be done on the table and Play-Doh can be played with on the table. And if it happens to get on the floor, it's generally a wood floor or a laminate floor. And that shit will dry, and then it can be swept up, it can be vacuumed up. And again, they're only kids while they're kids, and then they have the whole rest of their lives to be adults and to follow rules. Not to say that kids shouldn't follow rules. I just don't subscribe to taking away their childhood. I think I'm just so much more of a relaxed mom, like Christine talks about. So her and Janelle and their kids had to keep stricter rules in order to keep the peace and to keep the peace with Mary, but also because when you have so many people living with you, the kids can't be making messes all the time. And that absolutely makes sense. There's definitely got to be some parameters, and maybe they make a big giant mess with one thing and then they clean that up and they, get to go make a big giant mess with something else. Spoons and forks are for digging in the dirt, so are hammers. Like, be creative, let them use their imagination. One of my notes I have says hotel beds are for jumping on. So anytime I take my kids to a hotel, anytime we go to a hotel, we walk in, you put your bags where they go. First things first, we are going to jump on these damn beds, right? Like, maybe you don't want to jump on the beds at home because Lord knows whether you can afford to buy a new one if the kids crash them out, but Shit, if I don't have my kids, I'll go into a hotel room and jump on the bed. Have some fun, right? You only live life once. So she just said that there was a lot of chaos. She said she's sure that the kids felt like someone was always yelling at them. She said her bedroom had a queen bed and a bunk bed shoved together in that tiny space. I walked past one day and saw the kids jumping from the top of the bunk bed onto my bed. I didn't want to ruin their fun, but I knew if they saw me, I would have to put an end to it. I walked away. That memory still makes me smile. I just think that that's so cute that she was so fun with them and that she just didn't go overboard. And I think that people that have a lot of trauma or they have really hard lives, generally they go one of two ways. Either they become really strict and really rigid and a lot of times end up with OCD. Everything's got to be cleaned. Everything's got to be organized. Everything's got to be structured a certain way. Or you end up like me with a ton of clutter, a ton of chaos, 6 diagnoses of ADD. You're a squirrel all the time, even while you're trying to make content on YouTube. So she said soon after they got to Northern Wyoming, she got a job. She goes in and she's going to apply for this job. She says, while they're all living together, when she's talking to anyone outside of the home, she calls Mary and Janelle's kids her nieces and nephews. And then she calls Mary and Janelle her sisters. And so they had asked her about childcare, and she says, yes, I have childcare because my sisters are nearby. So she says the interview went really well, but she gets out to her car and she feels so much guilt. She just feels awful that she's gone in there and lied to this lady who's probably going to become her boss. So she turns around and she goes back inside and she tells the lady, I lied to you. And she says that the lady was just in shock. She says, I'm really sorry. I'm a polygamist. There are 3 wives. We raise our children together. If we're going to be working together, you need to know the truth. And then she says, I apologized to her and told her it's common in our culture because we had so much to fear from the outside world. But she was great. So my next note says the fear wasn't from the outside world, it came from within. There weren't scary things at this point in time that were happening in the outside world. These scary things happened 50 years prior. People weren't being arrested for being polygamists. Monogamous people were having affairs and they weren't going to jail for, having kids with their mistress, or I was going to say something else, but I won't say that. It's such a fear-based culture, and it has to be. Nobody in their right mind is going to live this way except out of fear. You don't see this as this beautiful, peaceful, happy, cohesive way to live. It is ugly and messy and toxic and brutal. And every once in a while, you are sprinkled with good times, good memories, some fun. And you pray to God that each family has a wife and a mother that's like Christine, that's like my mom, where they just incorporate these fun things. They incorporate the joy. As a child, I just only ever wanted to be with my mom. My siblings and I hated it when my dad would come home. Every single day without fail, the day would start out saying, Mom, is Dad coming home tonight? Every day without fail in the afternoon, evening, Mom, is Dad coming home tonight? Because we had to mentally prepare ourselves for when he came home. And the other wives weren't generally fun. I mean, once in a while, the one wife that was really hard and really strict, the one that grabbed me by my hair and dragged me down the hall and made me write, I will honor my father and mother 300 times, she was really good at telling stories. And there's a lot of my good memories from her are sitting at her feet at some holiday event and her telling us. There was one specifically called E Papananas, and I don't know where that story came from. She told it and she told it well, and it was awesome. And aside from that, I just don't really have any great memories. I don't really remember her being fun or kind, or she was very bossy, and my dad listened to her, and her roles were what structured our family. She was a born and bred polygamous child, and so she knew exactly what was up. And for most of my childhood, we went by whatever she said. And it sounds like that's how Mary was. And so it's kind of interesting too, because I know that in polygamy, families are like you're related to a lot of people. This wife specifically, her sister is other mother. So my dad's wife, her actual biological sister, is married to Mary's dad. That was another connection that I had because I spent a lot of time with that wife. My mom worked 3, 4 jobs, and so that wife did a lot of the childcare for us, unfortunately, when we were younger. Fortunately, honestly, we had a great time with our siblings, and I don't necessarily remember her being around or being involved. Ran the streets and kind of did whatever we wanted. So she says that she worked at that job for like 5 years. They're still in Wyoming. They added to their family. Janelle had Gabriel a few days before she had Gwendolyn. That's 10 kids if you're keeping count. She hadn't planned on naming Gwendolyn, but she gave me no choice. As I was driving home from work, I heard clear out of the blue, "Mom, my name is Gwendolyn." I went home and told Cody, "Her name is Gwendolyn." "Huh?" he said. "I don't know how I feel about that." I explained. She told me her name's Gwendolyn. And that was that. So she says when she was pregnant with Gwendolyn that strangers would rub her belly. She doesn't know why people don't ask if they can do that, but it was almost like Gwendolyn pulled them in. She would move for them. Usually when someone touches your stomach, the baby freezes. Gwendolyn would press up against their hand, wanting to be seen. Just like today, she loved it. And she says, I loved being pregnant. I loved being pregnant each and every time. I loved it pretty much start to finish. I loved the first 4 months of the baby. I loved breastfeeding. I know a lot of women don't necessarily love being pregnant. A lot of women don't necessarily love breastfeeding, but I loved it. I'm sad I only got to do it 4 times. While she was pregnant with Gwendolyn, she worried about things being fair and just. She would bring things up to Cody that she never would have talked to him about before. And she says that that's exactly what Gwendolyn's like. She needs things to be balanced even as a kid. If she got 2 cookies, then Gabe should get 2 cookies too. There's no drama in it, just wants the justice with the blindfold and the scales. It's so cute. So she says her birth story was her absolute favorite. The pain never got bad. She said her hips, as usual, wouldn't align. They turned on ABBA. I said, I got this. They turned on Mamma Mia. I started lip syncing. I went into transition during the song, crouched down on the floor on all fours, worked through the transition, got up, finished the song, and had her in 15 minutes. It was amazing. She says that she also recently found out that through DNA testing that she's related to Meryl Streep. That's really cool. My notes on this page say, don't touch a pregnant woman's belly. And I want to know too, because I have this thing where I had 2 babies in the winter, one at the end of November and then one in the middle of January. And I swear to God, if I had that in her car seat, in the cart at the grocery store, inevitably people would walk up and they would try to touch her hands. And that drives me crazy. Never touch someone's kid. Like, don't touch a stranger's kid. I just think that is one of the worst things that you can do. And then if you're gonna do it because you just can't help yourself, touch the baby's foot if there's a sock on their foot, or touch the top back of their head, but just don't touch someone's kid unless you ask them to. So you guys tell me, what do you think? Is that just so ridiculous, or is that like a thing? Like, does that drive you other moms crazy if you're out in public and someone touches your baby? Let me know in the comments. So she says years later, Gwendolyn started saying things like, I don't think that's fair, or I don't think that's right. I understood. I remembered, oh, I was like that when I was pregnant with you. And that's when she started to piece together that she would take on the traits of her kids while she was pregnant. I have to look back at that and think about if I was like that with my girls when I was pregnant with them, because I don't necessarily remember specifically um, if that's how it was. So in 2001, Nell worked full time during the day. So she watched the kids and was their main caregiver in her family. And she says that this really saved her, that polygamy appealed to her the most because of the kids. And she wanted her kids to experience having other moms, but she also wanted the friendship with those sister wives and didn't understand how much work would go into that. So then she talks about, statistically, 50% of marriages end in divorce. So what are the chances of building permanent, loving relationships with three adults you barely know? It was work, but she was committed. So she says that they were too. That, the other wives and Cody were too. And she says that they had a lot of good days. And so, she was trying to figure out her spot in the family. And then she realized that she really liked get-togethers. So she says she loved to play the party wife. And she says that Thanksgiving was a production. She says one time they had 72 people at Thanksgiving for Thanksgiving dinner. Come on. That is a lot of people for Thanksgiving dinner. I wonder if we've ever had that many people. My mom has 11 of us kids, 7 girls, 4 boys, and there's like 35 grandkids. So I don't think we've quite had 72 people, but we definitely have had some big Thanksgivings. Maybe when we were kids and when we were kids, even though we grew up not all living in the same house, we would get together for the holidays and we would do Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter. We would do all of those holidays together as one big family. And I think that ended in about, somewhere in the 90s. I think I was probably 15 when we quit doing family holidays together. I think there was just too much contention in the family at that point. Yeah, it just didn't work out. So she said that holiday foods were really important to them. Mary liked to cook the turkey and Cody liked her turkey. She liked to make her mom's dressing and her potatoes were so good. Holiday foods were important to us, but maybe more so to Mary than anybody else. She had things she made for specific holidays, and that was the only time they could be eaten. We couldn't make crab dip for Valentine's Day because it was for New Year's only. Fondue was for another holiday. Why can't we have fondue anytime? I love it. That's another Mary rule that they all had to follow. And that just kind of seems to be the theme in the whole book. Even now, still, she'll make specific foods for specific holidays because her kids love those traditions so much. And I remember that as a child. I remember certain traditions, certain get togethers. They were so much fun. Life was so hard 95% of the time. And then the other 5% of the time, you're planning for a big holiday get together and it is a ton of fun. She says, one of her favorite memories will always be Cody's mom teaching me how to make her rolls. She swore by certain brands and used a wooden spoon to beat in every cup of flour by hand. Jean says she used an electric mixer and then they'd figure out the pies. And then she says, Janelle and I started making pies together in Wyoming. We perfected a recipe we called chocolate pie heaven. I think that they talk about that chocolate pie heaven in one of the seasons. And so Christine put some pictures of them all in the middle of the book, and in the back of the book, she puts the recipe for her chocolate pie heaven. She says she's salivating just thinking about it. And then she talks about whipping cream. And she says, I'm not talking about frozen whipped topping. That's an abomination. Her German mothers would have her neck. So she would make the pie filling and the whipping cream, and Janelle would make the crust. She says that that woman excels at homemade pie crust. She cheats and uses Pillsbury. She says in that first house in Wyoming, they had to figure out the oven. And Lord, I remember this. My mom ended up redoing her kitchen. She got a small inheritance from her parents, like the sale of her parents' house. And so she took that money and she redid the whole kitchen in the second house that we lived in when I was a kid. And that house had been in our family. I think my dad bought it when the oldest kids were toddlers. And then his mom and sisters lived there for a while with them. And so it was a family house for most of my life. And then when they bought their compound south of Salt Lake, my mom's house got sold, to go into that. Okay, so they had to figure out the oven, what needed, what could be made ahead of time. So she said that they would start preparing months before. And Mary would make pretzel salad, which is jello, cream cheese, and pretzel crust. Her kids loved that. That could be done the day before, and the pies could be done the day before. But if they were having dinner at 2 p.m. on Thursday, we'd have to track back to figure what went in the oven when. The turkey needed to be warmed, but it would take time to make the gravy, and that would give her a chance to put the rolls in the oven. And that was key because we needed to smell them as we sat down for dinner. On these notes, I have that my mom taught me just recently. One of my other sisters generally always made my mom's homemade whipped cream recipe. So my mom just recently taught me how to make that. So I've made it probably 3 times in the last couple of months because I've been going down to my mom's and spending the weekends with her. And yeah, I can't imagine, why would you use the whipped topping that you buy in the freezer when it takes 5 minutes and it is so good you can eat it without pie. So, talking about these ovens and having to space out and, figure out the timing and stuff, I'm sure that's a normal thing, for a lot of people's Thanksgivings, but we definitely had to. We were making such large quantities of things. So I remember my mom sometimes putting the turkey in the oven at midnight, and then it would slow cook all night long. And so you would start to smell that turkey in the middle of the night, and so good. So she says when the kids got older, they would start helping in the kitchen. She says they still love to make those rolls. She says one year she had everyone write what they were grateful for on a slip of paper, and she baked the paper inside the rolls. No one could eat the rolls until everyone read their slip of paper. She says that her kids said that was the most rubbish year. She says that for the meal itself, she rarely got a chance to even sit down for it with all the ups and downs and platters and courses and second helpings. It was so much, there's so much work that goes into Thanksgiving, and then it's over in an instant. I definitely remember my mom, being up cooking, all the wives. I remember that about the holidays, just seeing all the wives in the kitchen working together. And when I was a kid, we would get together for Thanksgiving and we would do a big Thanksgiving meal, and then we would spend the rest of the day watching our homemade family movies, our family home movies. And that was always so much fun. And on Thanksgiving, everyone got dressed up. We all dressed as if, it was like church Sunday, and everyone looked nice for Thanksgiving. We all sat around the table together, so nobody ate until everyone was sitting. And then I don't know how it got started, but my parents would give each one of us 2 popcorn seeds. And we would go around the table to each person and everyone would say 2 things that they were thankful for, and then we would film that, and so, we would watch those on Thanksgiving the years past of what everyone was thankful for, and we got some good ones when my sisters were teenagers. They were thankful for things like hairspray and just funny stuff like that. So we always had a ton of fun getting together for those holidays. It really is like those are the memories and things that you think make living polygamy worth living. Even though I've never lived it, I never can imagine living it. I never would live it. I just remember the holidays were a ton of fun. And then as I got older, I would go to get, I think this started at my mom's probably when I was a teenager. We would go grab a newspaper, and Thanksgiving Day, the newspaper is, super thick. And so we'd take that newspaper and lay it out over the living room floor, and we would start to go through the ads and do Black Friday shopping. And of course, that's when Black Friday shopping was actually on Black Friday. One of the other things I love about the way that she writes this is she throws in a lot of stuff about Garrison. And so I really appreciate that. At this point, she says she loved the holidays, loved honoring everyone's family history and traditions. I loved thinking about what everyone brought to the family. She says on December 6th, because of her German ancestry, they celebrated St. Nicholas Day by putting candy in the kids' shoes. Then they would have too much candy, so we made and decorated gingerbread houses. She says eventually we used graham crackers because the gingerbread never held together. One year, Garrison decided to make an elaborate graham cracker train, and he couldn't get it to hold together with frosting, so she finally pulled out the glue gun. But then you can't eat it, he said, so worried about missing out. So cute. It's okay, I told him. We'll set some graham crackers aside for eating. So he made a massive train, and all the other kids looked at their own leaning cottages, and they wondered and admired Garrison's project. Whoa, Garrison's is the best. From then on, everyone used the hot glue gun, and she let them eat all the crackers they wanted afterward. She says, they would just set a bunch of crackers aside, and so the kids could just eat however many crackers they wanted. So I think it's fun that she's putting these memories in. And so you get to see from start to finish in this book what an absolute jackass Cody is and how hard polygamy is. This family was the example family, not just because they chose to be. I remember, I don't really remember these guys when they were married having their kids. I remember Cody and Mary and Melanie's wedding, and I remember them, growing up. I remember hearing about them and what a great couple they were. And then, seeing their family later on. My dad took all of his family up to the Browns ranch in Wyoming. I don't know where my dad got it, but he owned an auto body shop and a towing company, so probably through that. But he had a school bus, and so we all piled into a school bus, and this crazy man drove all of us up there to the Brown Ranch, and we stayed up there. And this bus broke down, I think just shortly before we got to the Browns. So I remember hanging out in a park up there. Actually, it seems like we might have slept in that park overnight, like camped out in that park overnight. And then we ended up at the Brown Ranch for, I think, at least a week because he needed to get a part to fix that bus so that we could all get back to Salt Lake.